Everyone who can already see and hear us, good evening. This is Dr. Francois du Toit. I'm a naturopathic doctor, and my co-host today is Dr. Faryal Luhar, who's also a naturopathic doctor, joining us live from Canada. Do let us know in the chat box area if you can hear and see us well, especially on a scale of 5, how good the sound and video quality is, so we can ensure that everything is working properly.
Good morning, good day, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Lovely to see you all. Thank you for joining us on this Saturday. It is our final webinar of the three-part series that Dr. Francois and I have been collaborating on together, and it's been absolutely wonderful to work together and to help empower people to take charge. I think right now is probably one of the best times, given everything that's going on, to reevaluate our health and to try and spend more time really enhancing our health, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. And we're going to be spending some time talking about mental and emotional health today as well. So really appreciate everybody being here today.
Yes, thank you, everyone, for putting aside your time on a precious weekend to join us for this third and last session. I've been really looking forward to this last session in our diabetes webinar series. And for those of you that haven't joined us so far, this is the third part. We've done 2 episodes already in the diabetes series. And we are very excited to bring you a lot of the practical dietary information alongside delving a little deeper into the gut, brain, and even the emotions and the psychology of how blood sugar and all of the above that I've mentioned affects our overall health. So,
are we just waiting for a few more people to join in?
Yes, that's right. I think we might need to make an adjustment there for the person in the waiting room, because that does seem a little bit suspicious, if you can see that.
Yeah, I can see this person. I know them very well, so I'm not sure what's going on. Yeah, I know them very well. Yeah. So I'm not sure why. One of you has joined us. Thank you so much, but it seems like you've joined 6 times.
That's a new one.
So we just, yeah, hopefully it's all good.
I'm happy to hear that. Okay, great. So for those of you who haven't heard about me, I'm in South Africa in lockdown, in the Western Cape, in a small town called George, where I'm originally from. I'm a South African trained naturopathic doctor. And Dr. Faryal Luhar and myself met when we were both members of the South African Naturopathic Association, where I was tremendously impressed by her contributions, specifically in terms of her research and expertise in healthcare. And I believe that it was really this overall mindset of the collaboration we had in the association that awakened me to the fact that it was wonderful to approach you in a time like this to go onto this wonderful journey on teaching people on how to live in optimal health, and especially relating to blood sugar.
Yes, absolutely. Likewise, it's been really wonderful working with you, and you know, it's interesting coming from 2 different parts of the world, 2 different continents, how the universe kind of brought us together. But what I found really amazing about all of this is just our mindsets have been so well aligned. It's been a really nice marriage of sorts, to be able to work with you, and knowing that we have the same passion and the same, you know, desire to really help people. And when we talk about insulin resistance, as we've been talking about the last 2 Saturdays, we know that this is becoming an epidemic when we talk about diabetes. It already is an epidemic. And then coupling that with obesity, which is also an epidemic. And now we have diabesity, which is a combination of diabetes and obesity. And it's something that we really need to start doing differently in terms of approaching how we treat it. And the good news is that we both agree that you can completely reverse this if you really make the commitment, take charge of your health, look at lifestyle, nutritional interventions, and so on. But in this time of the pandemic, it's important to point out that we know a lot of people who have any type of insulin resistance that could be full-blown diabetes, it could be, you know, leading to cardiovascular health problems, whatever it is, they are more susceptible to poorer outcomes when it comes to COVID-19. So that was another reason that we really wanted to tackle this topic so that people can use this time to get a handle on it.
Definitely. And it's also been the same in terms of just mentioning back to the mindset, how many of the factors we've been discussing have been so similar in terms of even the slide and the context without necessarily even discussing the detail, which is
Right.
wonderful when you understand that we're coming to it from this basic principle of naturopathic thinking, which is about holistic health. And it is a progressive natural medicine career, because the science and the information is constantly changing, but there's certain constants when it comes to helping the body to be optimally healthy. And I think that's why there's been this continuous touching point, even though we've both gone in many different directions in terms of specializing and honing our skills. On all of these topic points, we've been touching so many of the same points, which just affirms this is where you could say the nutritional science or the dietary science of things is really going. And yes, and even when we're talking about, you mentioned the immune system and how it is affected by blood sugar levels, it's one of those very empowering messages that you can drastically change your overall health and your immune system by making dietary and lifestyle changes. And that's the same for the immune system. So by applying the dietary advice and principles and being informed of how to take care of yourself, you can almost within a few weeks make a huge impact on the strength of your immune system, for example. And it doesn't even have to be a lot of big changes. It can be small incremental changes on a frequent basis, daily especially, and it will keep growing, because we actually want to establish healthy habits. And as with all habits, it
Right.
takes time, and we want to take it one step at a time. So I think we've everyone from the waiting room has joined in. And then, yes, let me start with the PowerPoint presentation. There we go. Can you see that up there, Dr. Luhar?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, brilliant.
Okay, volume.
Okay. Great. And if anyone by any chance happens to unmute themselves, if you just would be so kind as to just mute yourselves there so we can continue. But we are very happy to hear any of your feedback and questions in the chat box area, especially if you're having any connection concerns, and we'd be happy to respond to that as we're going on through the presentation. So what we'll be delving into today especially is the combination of how the brain, the gut or the gastrointestinal tract, and our emotions influence our overall health, especially as how it relates to the blood sugar levels, because our blood sugar levels have a dramatic impact on the health of our entire nervous system.
Okay, Francois, we can't hear you, or I can't hear you. All right, just bear with us, everyone. I think, Francois, we lost you there for a second. I couldn't hear you. I don't know about the others.
No, it must have been just with some of the settings there, but I think, can you hear me again?
Yeah, you're good. So you can go on.
Oh, okay, great, thank you. So what we'll be delving into today especially is, first of all, to define the digestive tract, or the GUT actually for the gastrointestinal tract, and how you are much more than just the food you eat, but what your body can or cannot digest. Then we'll be delving into the microbiome, the whole science of the colony of different bacteria and organisms that live in your body. But even more than that, it's also the understanding of how we coexist with these trillions and trillions of bacteria and other organisms. And then we'll be delving into the gut-brain connection, or the gut-brain axis called the GBA, which is really the central programming system. Call it the the Microsoft operating system of our bodies, this nervous system connection of the digestive tract and the brain. It runs almost the entire show. And then to tie into it, I'll be touching on, but not delving too deeply into the vagus nerve, just to make more sense for people that are very informed already about the gut-brain axis, is how this connection with the gut-brain is really coming into light, because the science of how the vagus nerve works is really on the forefront now in understanding this gut-brain connection. And then I'll be rounding off by explaining the dietary guidelines for achieving optimal health, with a specific focus on how we should balance our macronutrients, but especially the balance of healthy fats and carbohydrates to achieve optimal health, especially with blood sugar levels. So this is a very important quote from Hippocrates, who said, "All disease begins in the gut," who is also considered the father of Western medicine. We oftentimes need to go back into history and realize that there's nothing new under the sun, and most of the information that we should be focused on has already been postulated, even by someone who is considered to be the father of modern medicine. So going into the digestive tract, so we talk about the acronym is the gastrointestinal tract, but we slang it to make it gut just because it's easier to say. So most of you might see articles or see newspaper magazines, and they talk about the gut. Now you understand it's actually a bit of slang. And how your digestion actually starts is it starts with your brain and your nervous system, because it starts with the thoughts, and it starts with all of your senses, the smell of the food, the feeling of the food. In fact, one of the most interesting things is that I've discovered is people actually digest their food much, much better if they eat it with their hands. So it's actually, we are becoming disconnected with our food. And one of the big problems is that we're eating with a fork and a knife. And what happens is we're actually losing physically touch with our food. And as a result, we don't place the same emphasis on the taste, the quality. You get more in touch with your food in that way. It might seem like a strange one to mention in the beginning, but it really is the core of making sure that you are completely connected with the food you're eating. And then making it a whole sensory experience in terms of the smell, and about also it all starts to prepare the mind for the food that is about to come. But as most of us would think, digestion starts with the mouth and how well you chew your food. And one of the core lessons that I teach to my patients is that your stomach doesn't have teeth. So you need to make sure that you chew your food really well. Most of the articles that I've read that recommend 20 to 30 times you should be chewing your food. But I don't recommend to make it a mathematical exercise. It's about enjoying the taste and the quality of the food, being fully connected with it in that moment. Of course, this goes to also the environment that you create for yourself when you're having a meal. Ideally, if you're in a working pattern, you need to make a specific time where you allot it to go outside, for example, make a space where you can relax and breathe in some fresh air and just truly be present, being mindful of the food that you're eating. And one of the things that's happened is this is also the first step where we might be drawn into the wrong eating pattern because of the nature of taste. So we are drawn to want to eat sweeter foods, and that actually has a very important function, because the taste of sweet was designed to be a source of nutrition in nature, especially when we're thinking about the natural seasons. In certain seasons of the year, the warmer climate would come in spring and summer, and we would have a natural amount of ripened fruits, especially. And fruits are some of the sweetest foods we can have, naturally speaking. And what fruit would have concentrated when it was fully ripe and in season would be vitamin C. So a lot of the research that I've been reading has pointed to the fact the reason why we crave sweetness is not for sugar or glucose, it's for vitamin C. And those of you that are already taking vitamin C will realize, and have maybe read about it, that vitamin C is an essential vitamin. Your body can't produce it. In fact, we are only one of, I think, 2 or 3 other species in the entire world that cannot produce vitamin C's in our body. So that makes it essential vitamin. And more,
Let me just interject
you're
there
welcome.
for a second, Francois, because I don't know about others out there. I'm sure there are many that probably could join me on this, but I love chocolate. And I don't think there's high amounts of vitamin C in chocolate, but I do agree with you that the body's always craving certain minerals or vitamins, and that's why we have cravings for certain things. And I believe with chocolate, and I'll just put it out there that luckily it's dark chocolate that I eat, which is very high in antioxidants. I think it's manganese and chromium, which are important minerals as well. And interestingly, chromium is very important when we talk about insulin resistance. So just to kind of talk about the fact that, when you're having cravings for certain foods, it's not that like you said, it's not that you want that food, it's that you're craving something that food has.
That's
That the body
exactly the
needs.
point. Yes, that's exactly the point. In fact, I've read a lot about the reason why we crave chocolate. I'm myself the same. I love chocolate. Is because we crave the minerals that they contain, especially magnesium when it comes to chocolate. But there's many
Right.
more that I'm sure I'm not familiar with. But there's always a reason the body craves something. And the one can be a healthy trigger that you're looking for nutrition or those minerals. But on the opposite side, it could be an unhealthy trigger when you're already having an unhealthy colony of organisms or bacteria in your gut that's constantly digesting and used to digesting sugar. And then it hijacks your nervous system. It tells you want sugar and you want this food. For example, you want you want the cookie, you want the slice of bread. And it's because your digestion and the organisms in your gut has adapted to feed off those sugars for energy, and it's all your nervous system knows. So you can't always listen to what your body is telling you, but it's understanding how the things are playing on us. And one of the reasons why, especially, we can't unfortunately always trust our bodies or the sense is because of how the food industry has exploited the sense of sweetness, taste. People recognize that I've already discussed in some of the other episodes and gone into more detail about the bliss point. Suffice to say is that this is this scientific ratio of sugar to fats to sugars that makes your body addicted to food. But moving on, so then going down into the stomach, we realize this is where most of the food is being broken down by stomach acid. But the most fascinating thing is that there's been discovered that there's up to 7 different stomach acids, not just hydrochloric acid. And a lot of them haven't been fully researched or understood properly yet. But it's one of the things that I recognize clinically is that many people are walking around with an imbalance when it comes to digestion because of the stomach acid. And now when we start to look into how certain organisms, especially certain bacteria get a foothold in the stomach, like H. pylori, because of this imbalance in these different acids, we find that the digestion is halted and not functioning properly further down into the rest of the digestive tract. So it's a very common illness that's not treated out there, except for with symptomatic treatment with proton pump inhibitors or antacids, just to suppress, for example, reflux, which is not really the problem. The reflux isn't really the concern. It's why the body's why you're having that sensation of acidity. But that's actually a topic all by itself that I'd love to discuss in a future topic. But going on into the functioning of the liver and the gallbladder. So we understand the liver is especially involved with cleansing the blood and detoxifying, but it also has the essential role to play in digestion, where it produces bile, which is secreted by the liver and then stored in the gallbladder temporarily until it's needed to help to especially digest oils or fats in the diet. And the interesting thing is that the bile actually accumulates toxic fluid as well. So not only is the bile acid an essential part of digesting fats in our diet, but it's also an outlet for our liver to excrete toxins to get excreted and move along through the rest of the digestive tract. And one of the things that people often ask or tell me is, but I've heard so much about things like avoiding cholesterol, and especially that cholesterol causes gallstones and concerns like this. And the interesting thing is there's actually an opposite correlation between this problem. When you have already followed for example, a low-fat, high carbohydrate diet for a long time, or avoided cholesterol completely, healthy cholesterol is what I would qualify, of course, your gallbladder isn't functioning in the capacity that it normally would. And then you actually accumulate these crystals and toxic accumulates that form these stones because you're not consuming enough healthy fats in your diet. So it actually feeds into the same problem. Whereas when you're consuming some oils, be it even seed oils, and other healthy fats on a more frequent basis, your liver is functioning properly to produce bile, and it's actually flushing it out. And then there isn't this problem with forming gallstones in the first place. And then moving on to the pancreas. So we fully understand that the pancreas is involved in the blood sugar control, which we've been discussing so in depth, but it's also essential for producing digestive enzymes. In fact, it is essential for really breaking down food to its macro level, to its microscopic level. And it's producing all the enzymes to convert proteins, fats, and carbohydrates to these smaller, you could say, molecules. But then it's also producing a lot of bicarbonates, which is needed to change the acid environment of the stomach to an alkaline or a basic environment, which is necessary for the rest of the digestive tract to function. And then going into the small intestine, we go into what I like to call the land of the villi. And you can see just a small picture up there on the right. The best way I can describe this is that people that haven't heard about this before is the lining of your small intestine is full of these finger-like projections. And the best way I describe them, and the picture actually does it a lot of service, is it's like, looks like seaweed at the bottom of the ocean. It's these wavy finger-like projections that are constantly in contact with a food environment. And the reason it has this shape and appearance is because it dramatically increases the surface area of our gut. And if you even look into the microscopic level, we've got microvilli on top of the villi, which even increases the absorption area more. People understand, for example, when they are diagnosed with something called celiac disease, this is when the villi becomes flattened because of being very genetically sensitive to gluten, that the villi can become damaged, and then we don't have the ability to absorb the nutrients in the food that we're otherwise consuming. So this is where it ties into this importance about protecting your gut health, because you might be consuming the healthiest food in the whole world, otherwise thinking it's healthy, but maybe nutritional value potentially high, but still consuming things like gluten and other food toxins. And then the villi becomes damaged and your body's suffering to absorb the nutrients from your food. So that's one of the areas why we mentioned gut health is so important. I don't know if you wanted to maybe jump in there, Dr. Luhar, and mention your experience with this side of gut repair or the villi.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree with everything you're saying. The villi are so important. And unfortunately, this is where we have a lot of problems with absorption because we start to lose the villi. So it's the analogy I like to use is that, you know, if you've got a beautiful garden with the grass growing and the flowers and all these beautiful vegetation, as opposed to a completely barren desert, right? So really important information. But yeah, thank you for all the breakdown of the digestion and how it all works. It's really important.
Yes, I think many people have never fully visualized how the digestive system works, and that's why I wanted to go into this detail, because you'll see in a moment how this ties into how our bodies kind of like respond to dietary carbohydrates and sugar, and how it feeds into why we feel and think and even act in a specific way. But then just touching on further on, starting into the large intestine, we have the appendix, which is oftentimes considered a useless organ, but it's actually part of the lymphatic gland system. And we have about 80% of the lymphatic glands also wrapped around the entire intestines. But then it's one specific area where the toxic fluid passing over from the small intestine to the large intestine is then captured and broken down as part of our immune system response. So there's a reason why we get appendicitis. And unfortunately, this is part of my history. I was diagnosed with acute appendicitis when I was just under 10 years old, and I was rushed to hospital. Mine nearly burst and I could have died. And looking back on my history, I've been struggling with digestive problems my whole life. In fact, more recently in the last year or two, by doing a comprehensive medical scan, especially with electronic frequencies. Some of you might know about the SCIO devices.
Right.
I was actually diagnosed with borderline celiac disease that would predict for me happening in the next year or two if I don't make dietary changes. It's very sensitive to predict illnesses a year or more in advance. So some people get red flags when they see these scans. I've done a lot of these scans in my career also, but people are not maybe fully aware that these things predict illness so much early before they manifest. So for me, I've been cutting out gluten for all of my life, but it just affirms what I'm doing is so crucial to protect my villi. And then also one of the reasons the appendicitis developed in me is because this toxic effect that gluten has on the gut, and it needs to be kind of cleansed out. But then with the large intestine to round off, is where the final stage of the food is broken down, as well as a lot of the fermentation is happening. So you find that the majority of all the bacteria in our microbiome is situated in the colon because of this final broken down fermentation process, where even some final food molecules is broken down in the form that we can utilize in terms of even additional vitamins and healthy fats to be absorbed, alongside, of course, the final additional water to make the full use of the water in your diet. But now to delve into the microbiome. So the microbiome is one of the most complex systems of research that's been coming up in the last 10 years. Actually, I believe it's one of the most heavily funded fields of biology, especially in the light of the fields of immune and nervous system research. But even more, and I think Dr. Luhar, you might be aware of this, in terms of the research about the genetic function and even the epigenetics, because they've discovered that we have this entire store of information, genetic information, in our existing colony of bacteria, and healthy bacteria especially, that's constantly feeding information to the brain. But just a few figures, you'll find that there's 100 trillion bacteria in the colon alone, compared to only 40 to 60 trillion human cells. Now, when you take into account that the total number of bacteria in the body, this could be now including the small intestine, but even not just the entire body, the other systems, but also on top of the skin, that these bacteria outnumber our human cells 10 to 1.
We are more bacteria than we are human, actually.
Yes. And so it's a shocking thought that you're more non-human than human in terms of this whole system, because we are living in a constant state of symbiosis. And most of the symbiotic relationship that is actually influencing your optimal health is one that most people are just not aware of. So I think one of it starts with awareness. I think both of us resonate with this concept about being mindful and being aware and taking care of certain facets of our lives to make sure that we are the best that we can be. And one of it starts is just to appreciate this 90% bacterial colony that's constantly making sure that you're alive in the first place, and making sure that you understand and do research to help it to thrive. Of course, taking hands with a lot of naturopaths will guide you into this, because we've been studying the gut health for most of the career of naturopathy. So it's one of the fields that we are the earliest introduced to, and the research is now, in terms of, at least, I'm very thankful for the scientific research to point out so much about these benefits of gut health, now coming down to the specific organisms in the bacteria. So these bacteria contain about 150 times more genes than in the human genome. And this is why I was talking about this library of genetic information. And when you realize that this genetic information isn't just dormant, sitting there inside the bacteria, but they are communicating with the intestinal lining through the vagus nerve. It's actually a bidirectional communication, sequencing things like how our immune system responds, how much inflammation our bodies are producing in the gut lining. So it's all playing into each other. And going into actually all of these steps, so when you think about what the gut bacteria or the microbiome do for us is, number one, it's a protection against pathogens. But more than that, I consider it to be our first line of defense, because most people might have heard about leaky gut syndrome. which is something that a majority of people are walking around with without being fully aware, because they haven't been in touch with their bodies enough to realize of all of these imbalances in their digestion. But you don't develop leaky gut first. You first develop an imbalance in your gut flora or the microbiome, because when that is disrupted, then the food, which is also, for example, an allergen or a toxin, starts damaging the intestinal lining. I don't know if you wanted to jump in there and mention something, Dr. Luhar.
No, I totally agree that everything you're discussing here, you know, the gut is basically the interface between the external environment and the internal environment. And as naturopathic doctors, we've known about the gut bacteria and the importance of gut health for eons, right? So this is the place that I start with all of my patients, no matter what they're coming in to see me for.
Yes, it's one of those areas of health where when you put in the littlest amount of effort or change, you get the maximum output in terms of health outcomes. And this is true across the board with people, and that's very glad to that's how you approach it too. This is really the foundation of health, especially when
Yes,
we
and
help people.
the bi-directional communication is so important, because as we go further into the presentation, we're going to see how the bi-directional communication influences our food choices, influences the way we think and feel, like you said, our moods. And when we talk specifically about mental health and emotional health, it's so important that you know, we recognize that these bacteria are manipulative. They're very manipulative. And so when we're eating, most of the time we're eating because we're eating what they want, not necessarily what we want. But the good news is that we can manipulate them back based on what we feed ourselves.
Exactly, yes. You can think of your lifestyle as being information that's constantly changing this wonderful colony of bacteria, or in fact, a microbiome that expresses in all of these health benefits, including things like, just to run through these other sections, because these are all topics in and of themselves, how the bacteria in the gut help to synthesize more vitamins and minerals, making our food, in fact, more nutritious. This is why certain population groups can follow what we consider to be very simplistic diets. For example, Asian people consuming mostly rice. Not mostly rice, but as a factor, they can consume and produce a lot more nutrition from rice than we can, because of the bacteria that's natively found in their gut flora. But there's a lot there. And then even the immune system development is this combination of how the bacteria signals these lymphatic glands in our digestive tract, which is in fact 80% of our immune response is found in the gut. And then that also promotes intestinal angiogenesis, which is the formation of new blood vessels, to help to actually repair and heal the digestive tract. And the promotion of fat storage, which is what we've been discussing a lot in the previous episodes, about how the bacteria can even influence how your body utilizes sugars, or how quickly it would store those sugars or carbohydrates into fatty tissue. And that's got a lot to do with the type of bacteria you have in your gut, because there was this famous study that was done to show that when you, was a mice model study, where they discovered that when they were giving the mice the same diet, and they were actually taking an obese population of mice, and they transplanted those gut flora to normal weight mice, and they were feeding them the same exact diet, that the normal weight mice gradually became obese themselves. So there's a really big role there to play. And there's also in the gut being produced short chain fatty acids by the fermentation of dietary fiber, which is an essential molecule for inflammation control, nervous system health, and so much more. And then to round off, it also helps to modulate the central nervous system with this bi-directional communication with the nervous system. But that I will go into a little bit more detail a little bit later on. And some of you that might have been curious in terms of my previous slide, just a quick reveal. The reason why I've been using this about with broccoli so frequently in my slides is because there are certain foods that are in fact superfoods, and I'll be going into a few at the end, in fact. But this is one of the foods that whispers to your genes to tell it you can be better. And some of you will know that I'm referring to a TED talk that was done. If you Google this topic, it'll quickly come up. But it is in fact true that certain foods in the cruciferous vegetable family really do help your body not only cleanse, detoxify, but also optimizes the gene function, even on this gut flora intestinal level. But then I wanted to hand over to you here, Dr. Luhar. You're welcome to continue with your presentation.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for all that amazing information regarding the gut, because it is really important to you know, to see how, when we're eating, a lot of us are not really eating mindfully, if I can put it that way. And so it's really important, right from the chewing all the way to what's going on, to be able to get the nutrients and to be able to get rid of toxins that the body no longer requires. So I think that discussing the microbiome in you know, when we're talking about insulin resistance and many other chronic disease, it's really, really important. So thank you again for giving me the floor, and this is how people can get in touch with me. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the microbiome in you know, relation to the stress response, how the stress response is related to insulin resistance. We'll talk a bit about COVID-19, and then I'd really like to get into some of the mental health strategies, because we're living in very, very trying times. And for many of us, it's been quite stressful, but we also want to be able to figure out what is the gift. What's the gift in this time that we have? So when we talked about the bacteria, as Dr. Francois really elegantly put it, we have good guys and bad guys, and these are like our friendly little pets that live inside of us. So we want to be able to take care of them, because we have a relationship with them that is so important, and our survival depends on it, right? But we don't want to just survive. We want to thrive as well. So of course we want more of the good guys, less of the bad guys. And you know, a lot of experts are now referring to the microbiome as man's last undiscovered organ. This is how important it is that it is being classified as an organ in and of itself. A lot of this is established right at pregnancy, in particular during birth, because as the baby passes through the vaginal canal, it will start to take in a lot of the bacteria from the mom, and that is the beginning of that baby's innate immune system. We know that babies who are born through C-section don't have the same advantage in terms of being able to acquire all of these beautiful bacteria. And of course, breastfeeding also provides a lot of this versus bottle feeding. So it starts right at birth, if not before birth. I mean, the mom's health and what she's taking in is also so important in establishing the newborn's microbiome. And then the microbiome will eventually get to a point where it starts to match what an adult would have. And this is where you get your innate immune system maturing, and then you have the adaptive immune system. We have two different branches of the immune system. So when it comes to the microbiome, and in particular with insulin resistance, how much you eat is not as important as what you eat. So the composition of the diet is a lot more important than the actual amount of food, because as we said, food is information. It's telling the body what to do, but it's also feeding the guys that you want to help you to function well. So if there is an overpopulation of bad bacteria or other kinds of pathogens, whether they're viruses, yeast, fungi, parasites, and we are feeding them, and they are proliferating and they are thriving, then this is something that you need to think about, because what are we doing? Are we feeding ourselves, or are we feeding the disease or the condition that we're suffering from? So interestingly, good bugs actually need good food, and bad bugs love bad food. So it's just really that simple. I wanted to talk a little bit more about this particular slide, because what is interesting about this whole relationship is that the diet influences the microbiome, but then the microbiome again influences the diet, right? So it's kind of like this ongoing cycle, and we at some point have to break the cycle if we want to achieve optimal health. So when we talk about the diet, if we're eating very low fiber foods, you know, processed foods, what we would call the standard Western diet, inflammatory foods, which are laden with preservatives and other kinds of chemicals, high sugar, bad fats, largely meat-based, this is going to influence basically what is happening at the gut level in terms of these bugs, right? Artificial sweeteners are a big thorn in my side. I'm sure they are in yours as well, because this creates a huge mayhem in terms of your metabolism. The body and the brain senses that there's something sweet coming into the body, and so it sends a message to the pancreas to release insulin. But the problem is that that artificial sweetener does not have glucose, so then you end up having too much insulin in the bloodstream, but there's no glucose for it to metabolize, and then you start to get cravings for things that are not good for you to be able to get that insulin used up. So artificial sweeteners not only are bad for your metabolism, but that we know now that some of them can also contribute to cancer. And I do definitely discourage this. I don't know if you have anything to add about that,
No,
because
I
we have
do.
so many people having artificial sweeteners who are diabetics, right?
It's a shocking thing. I tell people that, sugar is damaging, but artificial sweeteners are toxic. So your body knows what to do with glucose or sugar. Your body doesn't know what to do with a toxin. I mean, it knows how to detoxify it, but it's something that's poisonous. So,
Yeah.
this taste of sweet, your body doesn't know the difference between that and a normal glucose molecule. So the insulin response is still going to be there, especially in the diabetic scenario. So I recommend
Correct.
people to completely break away from that, but instead of going for artificial sweetness, rather looking at the naturalist form of sweeter taste that they can find. Honey being a good example. The most moderate, of course, of use for a diabetic patient. But yes, I'm very much against that.
Yeah, there are many natural sweeteners that we can use. Monk fruit is one of my favorites. Stevia, for some people, they do enjoy that.
Xylitol,
And
yeah,
then, of
those are good
course,
ones.
raw honey, right? Organic maple syrup can be used. So there are lots of alternatives. But what is in the artificial sweetener in particular that's toxic is the aspartame. And we see aspartame in so many other things. You have to get really good at reading ingredient lists, and to make sure that you're avoiding that. I've seen aspartame in protein powders, for example.
I see them in
Right.
supplements too. It's a shocking thing. They're
Yeah.
putting an artificial sweetness there.
Correct. Yeah. So that's a big red flag, because that does influence our microbiome population. And then the other one that's a big one is overuse of antibiotics. And we are also facing a huge, what we call antibiotic resistance phenomenon right now, where people are not responding to antibiotics because the bad bugs have become super bugs. They've become super resistant and are not responding anymore. And so we have a problem here where we now need to figure out what are we going to do, because the antibiotics are not working. So too much antibiotic use wipes out the population, right? Anti means against, biotic means life. So it's wiping out both the bad guys and also the good guys. And the good guys are our soldiers. They're our military. They're our defense system, among other things. So, of course, this is going to influence the proliferation and, more of the bad guys, because it's going to disrupt normal and healthy gut flora. As you said before, we live in a symbiotic relationship with these bacteria, but then we get something that's called dysbiosis, not symbiosis, where there's an overpopulation of the pathogenic or the bad bugs, and we continue to feed the bad bugs. So then we end up having inflammation in the gastrointestinal tract. These bad bugs also release, as part of their metabolism, they release byproducts that are very toxic, which go on and create more inflammation. And then that inflammation gets into a situation where signaling for insulin is blunted. And then we start to have problems with having effective insulin production. And this will then lead to, among other things, fatty liver, problems with cholesterol, cardiovascular disease, cancer, metabolic syndrome, and so on. And of course, diabetes, right? But interestingly, these guys are the toxic bugs, which actually make you fat and inflamed, and bad bugs influence food choices. So what happens is, because we are feeding these guys, they send, through this bidirectional communication that Dr. Francois spoke about, messages to the brain asking for more of the same. So they get us to eat what they want via the vagus nerve.
Yes.
Very important to think about.
They're fighting for their right to be there, because literally they want to be there, and they're fighting a chemical warfare to stay there. And that's what
Right.
the nervous system gets confused, and we start making poor choices too.
Yeah, we start making poor choices because these guys influence the way that we feel, they influence our moods, and a lot of us are eating for emotional reasons, you know. Let's be honest about that. So the relationship between diet and the microbiome involved in developing insulin resistance is very, very evident, but it's also part of the solution. So once we start to change our diet, we start to change the microbiome, and in a later slide you'll see that it's amazing and fascinating that studies have been done to show that when you start to change your diet, you will see a difference in the microbiome population within 24 hours. 24 hours. That's amazing, right? So I just want to talk a little bit about this slide. Let's not, you know, I don't want to overwhelm people, but it's an important slide from the Journal of Clinical Investigation that was done in October 2019, talking about the gut microbiome and metabolic syndrome. And I really love this figure that they added into their publication, because it shows us what's happening when we start to eat foods that are going to change our microbiome. So on the left, where you have the green bugs, this is where you have, you know, good dietary choices, there's balance, there's your metabolism is working well. But if you look at where it talks about the intestinal epithelium, this is the gateway, you know, and the gateway is guarded very, very tightly by something called tight junctions. And so those tight junctions are, if I were to put my fingers, interlock my hands, this is what the tight junctions look like, right? Very, very tight, so that they only allow what needs to be inside the intestinal lumen and to be digested, to stay there without allowing things to leak out and allowing other things that shouldn't be coming in to come in. And then you have good metabolism and good digestion, and everything is healthy. On the other hand, on the right side, when we start to get dysbiosis from poor dietary choices, inflammatory foods and junk foods and so on, we start to feed the bad guys. And then those bad guys, you know, influence these tight junctions. So over time, the tight junctions start to open up, right? And you get gaps in these tight junctions. The integrity of the gut lining is breached. Things can start leaking in that shouldn't. Things that shouldn't be leaking out start to leak out. These gut bacteria that are the pathogenic kind will start to release toxins, one in particular called lipopolysaccharide. And lipopolysaccharide is very, very inflammatory. It's very toxic. There is a term called metabolic endotoxemia, and this is what starts to happen. And it leads to binding of the immune cells with inflammatory cytokines or inflammatory compounds. And when this happens, we know that fat cells are already releasing a lot of inflammatory cytokines. These things then enter the circulation, and we get chronic inflammation of the liver and of the fat cells, which is what is associated with the development of cardiovascular disease, insulin resistance, and other conditions associated with metabolic syndrome. So I just wanted to illustrate here, thanks to, you know, this beautiful illustration from this journal about what is happening with the gut integrity and the production of these bad toxins when it comes to triggering inflammation and therefore blunting the signaling for insulin, and then we start to have weight gain, insulin resistance, and so on. Did you want to add anything to that, Francois?
No, it's wonderful to see it explained in such a thorough way, especially in terms of visualizing this gut integrity, because most people hear about leaky gut and it doesn't become real to them until they actually start seeing, you know, the intestinal epithelium and the gap junctions that you so brilliantly explained. This is what's really happening on a microscopic level, and it's a real phenomenon, but not necessarily as scary as it sounds, but it has a dramatic impact and can be very toxic to our bodies.
For sure. And the good news is that we have in our toolkit many things we can do to repair the intestinal epithelium, the intestinal lining, to basically restore the gut integrity and those tight junctions that I spoke about. And so this is why we tend to, start with the gut with all of our patients, right? So as I said before, you know, gut bacteria are manipulative, but the good news is that we can also manipulate them back based on what we're feeding them. So if you start to change your food choices, you will start to change the microbiome and see changes within 24 hours in many cases, right? So what do we want? We want whole, fresh produce, obviously organic wherever possible, so that it has not been sprayed with pesticides and herbicides, all of those things that we spoke a lot about in the previous webinars. Mostly plant-based would be great. And what I usually like to ask people to experiment with, to be able to have a beautiful diversity of these bacteria in your gut, because you want your gut to basically mimic a very lush tropical rainforest that's full of beautiful species and all these different colors and types of vegetation. And so eat 4 new vegetables every week. Try to see if you can introduce a couple of new vegetables every week into your diet. And the reason I say vegetables, I mean, fruits are also included, but when it comes to insulin resistance, depending on where you are on that spectrum, I tend to actually ask people to minimize their fruit intake. But we want lots of fiber. We want lots of fiber because this is the fuel for the good bacteria, the short chain fatty acids that you spoke about, Dr. Francois. And in particular, we have one short chain fatty acid called butyrate. So for those of you who are really into the science of it all, butyrate is really important. It's the fuel. It's the fuel for the cells of our colon, but it's also anti-inflammatory, right? And so we get a lot of this kind of short chain fatty acids when we eat lots of fiber. And of course, probiotics would be implicated in this situation. You can get them from foods, fermented foods, kefir, certain types of yogurt, sauerkraut, and so on. But in many cases, I'd say probably 9 out of 10 times I'm prescribing probiotics for my patients just because they are so far gone that they need a lot more, you know, in the billions, 25 to 50 billion per capsule in some cases of various different strains. So the amount of the healthy bacteria is important, but so is the strain, the diversity. It's important to have different types of healthy bacteria. And then of course healthy fats, because they're anti-inflammatory. It's the inflammatory fats that are bad for us, right? And then just as a point of interest, what about fecal transplants? Okay, so you know, I always joke with my patients when I do these talks, because we've lived in a society and come to a point where in the past, to treat problems of the gut, we were using antibiotics. Now, because we are having this antibiotic resistance, we are now using poop basically to treat the bad bugs, right? By reintroducing the good guys. And so for those of you who may not know, fecal transplants are actually taking the fecal matter from a healthy individual and transplanting it into somebody who's very, very sick. They've done a lot of this with patients who have Clostridium difficile, for example, and try to repopulate their gut.
It's been the only treatment that really saves their lives. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So I just want to put it in there as a point of interest to say that for problems of poop in the past, we were using antibiotics, and now for problems of antibiotics, we have to use poop, right? But it does have something to say about what's going on in terms of the overuse of antibiotics that are basically eradicating our healthy gut microbiome. So we're going to delve into a little bit more now about stress in relation to the microbiome. And as you pointed out, Dr. Francois, you know, we talk a lot about the gut-brain axis, but now more and more in research, they're actually calling it the gut-brain microbiome axis, or the gut microbiome brain axis, because of the importance, of the significance. Yeah, so you'll hear it instead of being called the GBA, it might be called the GMBA or the GBMA, right? Because wanting to highlight this bidirectional communication system between the central nervous system and the microbiome through the vagus nerve, right? So whatever we're putting in is sending information both ways. And this is why it's so implicated also in our stress response. So if we are feeling stressed, and I don't want to get into too much about it just because of time restraints, we tend to then shut down the vagus nerve. And if we're going to shut down the vagus nerve, we are then allowing for inflammation and leaky gut, because the vagus nerve is so important for keeping these things at bay. We know that when you're feeling stressed, whatever the stressor is, whether it's traffic, whether it's financial problems, whether it's loss of a job, or even right now with the pandemic, our adrenal glands, which sit on top of the kidneys, they're really tiny, but they're really mighty, and they release stress hormones. There are different stress hormones, the most important being cortisol. Now, when we have chronic elevated cortisol, we have a number of different symptoms that will ensue. Of course, abdominal weight gain and accumulation of belly fat. And this is one of the first things that will help us to identify somebody who's becoming very, very, very insulin resistant. So we use waist circumference as a tool. And there are certain measurements with taking, you know, the circumference for a man and for a woman. I believe it has to be below 88 centimeters for a woman and below 102 centimeters for a man, right at the belly button across. And if it's over that, then we know that you're insulin resistant. So it's a great way of just at a glance being able to tell. And then increased blood sugar and cholesterol is another one. When cortisol levels become, you know, aberrant, we will experience muscle loss, lots of fatigue. It does interfere with thyroid and other hormones. There are going to be implications with sleep. So a lot of people who have chronic stress are having difficulty with either falling asleep or maintaining sleep. And of course, if you're not sleeping, you're probably eating, and you know, your circadian rhythms get messed up. You get more sugar cravings. And there was a study done of healthy young men who were deprived of just 2 hours of sleep, and their blood levels of ghrelin, which is the hunger hormone, right? This is the hormone that tells the brain that you're hungry, increased, whereas the PYY, which is a hormone that puts a brake on appetite, decreased. So what does that mean? The signals are not working, and there's the orchestration is no longer there. And so you also end up with mood disturbances, irritability, anxiety, depression, dementia, memory problems, and of course, immune dysfunction. So many implications if stress levels are not being managed well. And luckily, we have tests where we can check through saliva about where your stress hormones are, because it does follow a circadian rhythm. So cortisol levels should be highest in the morning, and they should taper down at night. And if that's not the normal curve that an individual presents with, then we can expect a lot of these things to be showing up, right? So a lot of these things are already happening when a person presents to us, and it goes right back to stress. What do you say, Dr. Francois?
No, it's just really, it's also a bit of a two-way reaction of our bodies. And in fact, anything that produces this type of stress response in our bodies puts our bodies into the survival response, where suddenly we are seeking things that will immediately fill us with energy. Unfortunately, this is where this whole blood sugar and insulin response comes in. It's tied to our survival mechanisms, which were important when we were still living in nature, having to run away from the lion or the saber-toothed tiger. But now it's, for example, like you mentioned, just missing a few hours of sleep on a frequent basis, or, you know, thinking it's normal to have 6 hours of sleep in any given evening over a long period of time. And the damage that does, it's horrendous. Luckily, the body can recover quite quickly in terms of this hormone profile, even from 1 week to the next. But it's just about that awareness about how far we've gone.
Yeah, it is. And, you know, a lot of us might start to think that getting headaches all the time or having joint pains or feeling fatigued, it's just our new normal, right? And you just live with it. But these are messages the body's sending you that something's out of whack. And so, as you said, awareness is really important. Identifying where the issue is really important. And then finally, it's important to address it. We need to start developing good coping mechanisms regularly. And that's where I think naturopathic medicine really shines, right? So just very important to appreciate that chronic stress is going to eventually lead to dysbiosis, the term that we use to talk about unhealthy bacterial populations, which influence our health. So let's not forget the immune connection. I'm just going to talk a little bit about this. As you mentioned previously, you know, the healthy gut flora, our immunity is coming mostly from this. 80% of our immune function is related to our microbiome. It acts as an anti-infectious barrier, and it also releases toxins to kill pathogens. Okay. Many bacterial species are involved in the synthesis of vitamins, such as all of the Bs and vitamin K, and folic acid or folates, biotin. And then there have been studies done on diabetic patients compared to non-diabetic controls, where we know now, this is true for obese people, this is true for patients with cancer, this is true for many people with chronic disease, that they have a reduced amount and a reduced diversity of the healthy bacteria compared to normal healthy individuals. And this is significantly correlated with a reduced glucose tolerance. So microbiota, or the microbiome, influence both of the branches of our immune system, which I touched on previously, because we originally get the initial immune, the gift of immunity when we're born. And high blood sugar or hyperglycemia alters the gut flora, which automatically weakens the immune system. I mean, we are, eating upwards of 22 teaspoons of sugar in a day. In the past, 100 years ago, our ancestors were eating that amount maybe in 5 or 6 days, maybe in a week, right? If you think about just a bottle, a 500 ml can of Coke or some other soft drink, there's already 10 or 12 teaspoons of sugar in there already, right? My favorite is when people say to me, oh, but I'm just drinking Diet Coke, or I'm just drinking Coke Zero. Well, what's making it sweet? Is it an artificial sweetener? That's even worse for you. So all of these things are really, really important, because sugar feeds the bad guys. Sugar is inflammatory, it's acidic. So it's just, creates a host of problems when we think about our health. I'm sure you agree with that.
Yes, I mean, we need to be teaching the new generation, the kids, that this is not the way to eat, because it's very difficult to make these lifestyle changes when you're older. But when you're young, you can start introducing these bitter tastes, these sour tastes, and increase it more and more in their diet. And then you actually training them to love foods that are healthy for them, because these are mainly bitter foods, like the cruciferous vegetable family, that we need to actually fall in love with.
Yeah, so looking at this again, just to kind of put it all together and tie it all into a nice little bow, poor diet is going to obviously influence, our health. On top of that, if there's chronic stress, then we're getting a double whammy there with relation to our microbiome and our immune function. We're going to start to see dysbiosis, breaches in the gut integrity, gut disturbances. Of course, there's going to be lots of inflammation, lowered immunity, and then all of this certainly is going to influence how sensitive our insulin levels are. So when it comes to COVID-19, if I can just shift gears a little bit here, as we said before, individuals with underlying diseases such as diabetes, heart disease, blood pressure, and so on, are having severe outcomes or poorer outcomes. We are seeing this every single day. And, it begs the question, why? Why is this happening, right? So with everything we've just discussed, I think many of you might start to put and connect the dots together to say, well, it's interesting, because if these individuals are suffering from diseases that are inflammatory, they're suffering from diseases that clearly are blunting their immune response, because high blood sugar is automatically going to lower your immunity, weaken your immunity. And of course, these individuals probably are dealing with, they've probably never really discussed diet in terms of their treatment regimen, which is so important, given that the microbiome is pretty much directing a lot of the stuff, right? So why does COVID-19 have an advantage? And before I want to get into that, I just want to say that, unfortunately, we're living in a society that's very reactive. So we wait for an event to happen before we actually do something about it. And I'm sure that I can speak for Dr. Francois and myself, and for many other naturopathic doctors out there, and other doctors who have the same philosophy, which is we want to be proactive. So naturopathic medicine is preventive. It's also about taking action before something goes out of hand. You have to be proactive. And we know that all of the the Centers for Disease Control and other organizations related to global health are telling us that 1 in 3 people or 1 in 4 people are going to contract this virus, right? It's interesting, Dr. Francois, and I wanted to just open the stage up to you a bit as well about what you think is going on, because I think that we have put in so many measures which are important measures, right? The social distancing, wearing of the masks, sanitizing, all of these things are really important for keeping us, healthy and safe. Having said that, we have to just learn to live with this virus. I don't believe that we're just going to get rid of the virus.
Yes, and it doesn't seem like, even from the beginning, and luckily here in South Africa, it's been communicated to us quite well. It's never been about as much to, mitigate the effect. It's more about extending the exposure rate, always about lowering the curve. And the fact of the matter is, yes, at one stage or another, we'll have to be confronting COVID-19 in one shape or another, be as true that the figures are, untrue the figures are. In the end of the day, what you're in control of is how strong your body's going to respond to it. And this is where the
Correct.
lifestyle, diet, and immune system factors all come into play. And when you especially take into account that, unfortunately, a lot of the measures that will be taken now are drastically decreasing our exposure to things like our environment, bacteria, organisms that are essentially part of our microbiome too, meaning slowly and progressively stimulating our immune system to be the best it can be, especially if we talk about all these positive influences. You actually are building the best immune response you possibly can. So it's this very difficult balance in terms of what is happening in the world, and that we actually need to have these probiotics and other stimuli to make our immune system the strongest it can be.
Absolutely. And so this is a perfect opportunity to now equip yourself with the ammunition that you need, so that when things open up, what I'm worried about, to be very honest, is that because a lot of us have been indoors and we've been staying at home and we've been basically, isolating ourselves, which has been an important measure, our immune systems now might have taken a little bit of a vacation. They might have said, oh, okay, we don't need to work really hard because we're just at home all the time. We're just going to relax, maybe go to sleep. And what's going to happen when everybody now starts to go back to work and the world kind of starts again, and people return to work and school and so on? Are our immune systems going to be strong enough to be able to deal with this, because we've kind of not been exercising the immune system so much, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So I don't want to give the wrong message here. I'm certainly encouraging I think both of us are definitely encouraging that you stick to all of the measures in your respective countries, but important to also think about, how the immune system is working, so that you can make sure you have the best chance, right, to deal with this virus should you contract it. So when it comes to diabetics and others, with the COVID-19, what has been found out is that the coronavirus, it binds to a specific receptor on the human cells. So if you look at my little cartoon animation here, we have little receptors called ACE2 receptors. And those receptors are the receptor sites by which the coronavirus has to bind, successfully lock, and then once it's locked and docked, it then releases its genetic material into the host cell. And by doing this, by releasing all of its RNA, it then hijacks our cells and takes over the machinery to continue to multiply and spread the disease, right? So interestingly, the oral hypoglycemics and a lot of the other medications that diabetics are placed on, and some of our cardiovascular health patients are placed on, also use ACE2 receptors. Those drugs are also binding to ACE2 receptors to be able to do their job. But what happens is some of these drugs help the cells to create more. They upregulate the production of ACE2 receptors on the surface of the cell. So the hypothesis is that it's possible that this population is having a harder time with COVID, because when they're taking those drugs, in particular ACE2 inhibitors or other types of drugs like this, that they are just increasing entry sites on the surface of the cell for the virus to enter. So I'm certainly not suggesting that this is 100% proven or true, but that's what's been talked about. And so there's been some controversy regarding whether patients should be continuing their medications, and that's something you have to discuss with your prescribing doctor, okay? But I think from our point of view, better to treat yourself, using other methods, and like we said, just giving your body the ammunition it needs to be able to deal with this. So again, let's shift gears once more. We're living in stressful times. It is very, very trying and difficult for many of us, there are so many things that we're being bombarded with. I think for a lot of us, which I found very interesting, some people have found that working from home and being at home has been really amazing, and it's given them a lot of downtime, time to be spending quality time with family and so on. For others, it's actually become a huge stress because everything is being done at home. Your home is where you work. It's where your children are being schooled. It's where you're playing. It's where you're spending time with your family. It's where you're cooking. It's where you're working out. So everything is being done at home, right? We don't have the outlets that we have had in the past before this pandemic started. Obviously, a lot of us are reaching for comfort foods, and we're eating stress eating, which certainly isn't helping our insulin resistance and or our immune function. There are no routines for some of us. We're sort of going to bed at 2 and 3 in the morning, waking up whenever. So the routine has also become stressful because there isn't much of a routine. It's been difficult balancing work and home life. Of course, the financial stresses that have taken hold with the pandemic, with people losing their jobs and businesses not being able to survive. Isolation, lack of connection is another big one. Some of us are actually dealing with sick loved ones or people who have contracted the virus, which is very difficult. And there are many, many more. I'm sure a lot of you can think of many, many more stresses that you're dealing with all together in this time, right? So it's a lot to take on. And that's why it's that much more important to be kind to yourself and to actually pay attention, and do the self-care, if I can put it that way. Like it's really important to be a little bit selfish right now, right? I'm sure you'd agree.
It's so important to be aware that you have this opportunity, a really rare opportunity to assess every single aspect of your life and make the most of it, because what I've seen increasing in people's lives are in fact their weaknesses and their vices, and say lack of structure, lack of routine, lack of certain habits. So these things have grown because of just being confronted with them, and that's what generally expands. What you spend time with expands. That's just the law of the universe. And as you're finding these routines coming in that we want for optimal health, especially what we've been discussing, there's all 3 webinars, you find that everything that would bring about optimal health really would manifest in your life, and much, much more, even in terms of habits and mindset and lifestyle. It's so much more than just health, really, but it definitely comes into there for sure.
Yeah. I know that people who have been dealing with mental health issues previously, if you were someone who was dealing with anxiety or depression on any level or any other mental health problem, I think that unfortunately this pandemic has amplified those conditions, right? So as much as it's important to take care of our physical health, we really have to take care of our mental and emotional health right now, and make sure that our cups are full. Because if your cup is not full, then you're working from an empty cup. You really have nothing that you can offer, especially if you're got kids or people to look after.
Yeah.
So I wanted to just talk about this last aspect of my presentation, which is strategies, so that we can emerge stronger, happier, and more resilient. And I absolutely love this painting. It's a painting of an Amazonian native Indian woman. And the reason I love this painting is because it speaks so many different things about what we've been talking about. You'll see that the background is a beautiful, lush Amazonian tropical rainforest, which is reflected in her gut. That's what we want, right? So important. But also the fact that we have to be in tune with our environment, that we are one with the environment in many ways, and everything is connected. And nature is so important for our mental, emotional health. So I'm sure there are many things about this painting that, speak different messages to different people. But various populations in the world, as you said before, have different diversities of their microbiome because of where they are and what they're eating. And so that influences how sick or how healthy that population is, right? So let's talk about a few things. I'm sure there are many others, Dr. Francois, that you might be able to add that people can maybe try. These are some strategies and tips that I think will go a long way in helping us to keep ourselves healthy mentally and emotionally. And I think watching the news constantly, taking in all of the posts and the information, even through social media, can be very stressful, because a lot of it is negative, right? We're being bombarded with this stuff 24 hours. So important to take a break. Take a break, try a 24-hour fast, you know, disconnect for a little while. It's really important for reducing anxiety levels and so on. Of course, all of the dietary guidelines we've been discussing in these 3 webinars, incorporate them as much as possible because that's the foundation of good health. Move regularly. So even though you may be stuck at home, there are several online workout videos on YouTube and so on. And interestingly, when you're moving regularly, you're actually improving the diversity of your gut flora as well. Moving also improves oxygenation. It releases endorphins, which are important for helping us to feel good as far as mood is concerned. A lot of us are binge watching, you know, series and Netflix and whatever until 2 and 3 in the morning. Probably not a good idea to do this as a regular thing. You need to stick to a regular sleep schedule. Make sure that you're getting the 7 to 9 hours because there's so much going on during sleep to help repair and heal the body. Adopt a mindfulness practice, right? So if you aren't already, try to get into, you know, some sort of meditation, mindfulness-based practice, whatever that may be for you. It could even be prayer. It could be, you know, guided imagery, visualization. And there are several apps that are now working to help people to do this. Calm, Headspace are some of them. If you need to speak to someone, talk to someone, right? If you need to stay connected with friends and family, but you need to be able to talk to somebody about whatever you're feeling and experiencing. And in some cases, if a counselor is required, then please reach out for a counselor. Many of them are offering virtual consults just like we are, but there are apps like Talkspace and Happify that also incorporate different strategies such as, you know, CBT and reframing negative thoughts and things like that. So I think take advantage of these things. Get your dose of sunshine and fresh air. Of course, honor the social distancing measures. So if you can keep to the, you know, 6 feet, 2 meter distance, step outside, get some fresh air, get your sunshine. It's really important. You need your vitamin D.
One of the things I wanted to maybe just cut in, sorry, is that we're actually opening up now to lockdown 3 in South Africa, 1st of June. And one of the things that you've just reminded me of is one of the best ways for us to be reintroduced to society is definitely, of course, honoring social distancing, but even more so, being reintroduced straight into nature in terms of completely avoiding necessarily people in general, because we are being exposed, just like that beautiful painting that you showed, to the type of environment that nourishes us on the inside. So make it a beautiful walk in nature for your introduction to this wide, wide world again.
Yeah, you took the, you know, I'll be talking about that. So you took the words right out of my mind, discussing that. I wanted to say, listen, dance to your favorite music. Really important. It goes a long way in you know, improving mood. And if you're moving, and, you know, it's a really great way to just have some fun. Play with your pets, because guess what? When you play with your pets, you're also getting the gift of their microbiome from their, you know, their skin and their fur and so on. And it's really important to spend time with your pets, play with them, because they make us really happy. And they're great for our...
Studies showing that pet owners are much healthier than non-pet owners in terms of their immune function. Yeah. And this is one of the reasons, in terms of they're bringing the outside in for you. So it's really a tremendous benefit.
Absolutely, absolutely. Of course, we've spoken about probiotics, you know, that we know they exert a positive influence on physical and mental emotional health, but they also actually regulate serotonin, which is your happy hormone, and GABA, which is a very calming hormone, right? So when we have our adrenaline pumping, or we've been really stressed out about something, probiotics actually help to calm down that response. So very powerful, not just for physical health, but for mental, emotional health as well. And we know from studies showing us now that people who are on antidepressants actually respond a lot better to those antidepressants when they're taking probiotics.
Yes.
So
and
they could end up with...
Probiotics are coming to your health food store in the next near future.
Exactly. Right. So of course, we want you to take medicines as prescribed. When it comes to a naturopathic medication point of view, understand that it's very important that if you want to deal with your own health picture, you need a one-on-one comprehensive assessment. You need the proper testing. There are many medicines that we use that actually sensitize insulin, for example. So over the last 3 webinars, Dr. Francois and I have been highlighting many lifestyle and nutritional interventions, but that's not to say that we don't have beautiful natural medicines, things like gymnema or berberine, or other things like I mentioned chromium as a mineral, that you might need that extra support if you're really, really insulin resistant and diabetic, right? So that is something that can only be prescribed. It's an individualized, customized approach. You might need some adrenal support. You may need some immune boosting nutraceuticals. So important to seek out a practitioner to be able to help you with your own health picture. And then this is beautiful, just to tie back to what you said about spending time in nature. If you can now, wherever you are, do this. It's so important. And things like earthing or grounding are so important. This is just having any connection, your body with the earth, whether it's walking on the beach with this on the sand, whether it's being in a forest. And I love the idea of forest bathing. Forest bathing is something that people do quite a bit of in countries like Japan. And just being with the trees, being with the flowers, being with the birds and the vegetation, not only calms and brings down our cortisol levels, but there's so many essential oils that are also being released by all of these trees that help our immune system, that help us in many different ways. So you got to spend some time as much as possible. I'm really lucky because the weather is beautiful here right now where I'm in Canada going into the summer, but also my sister runs and operates with her husband a chicken farm. And so I spend probably 2 or 3 days a week at her farm, just enjoying the countryside and the chickens and collecting the eggs and so on. And it's beautiful. So these are some strategies. There are probably many others, but it's really important to pay attention to these more now than ever before. This is me actually in South Africa, hugging a tree, doing a little bit of my own forest bathing. So yeah, thank you so much for allowing me to share all this information and to collaborate with you, Dr. Francois. That brings me to the end of my presentation.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Dr. Luhar, and I think let me quickly just share my contact details so people know how to get in touch with me. And one of the things that I've been recommending for people now, especially if we're coming into the winter now, unfortunately, so it's a bit less of ease to be outside. But what I do recommend to people is to really nourish their most immediate environment, especially your garden. And I've met so many people that have gone into organic vegetable gardening because of what's happening in the world and how much they realize the importance of nutritious food and taking control of your food supply, taking control of your health really is what's happening. And there's one thing that pulls together this whole concept about being in touch with nature, getting sunshine, as well as making nutritious food. That's vegetable gardening. It's really one of the keys to longevity. So yes, thank you so much everyone for your time and attention. It's been wonderful to have you on this journey alongside with us, and I am tremendously thankful for Dr. Luhar.
I was going to say, Dr. Francois, do you want to share a little bit about your dietary guideline? Is there a slide that you couldn't get to that you feel is really important? I'm sure people won't mind staying another 5 minutes.
I really would like to, yes. I think for them, I have prepared. Let me jump back here. So yes, so this is quite a dense one. So I'm going to actually, while we're loading this video up onto YouTube, but just to give you a bit of an insight that most of the dietary advice that have been given us has to be this kind of like leaning towards a high carbohydrate, low fat diet. And we're completely flipping it on the head here with the food pyramid, a very rare one that you'll find that actually explains it in terms of what I see a holistic food pyramid with that advice. So we see, starting at the top now, the things we want to avoid is processed grains and sugars, minimum to no consumption. But this also includes complex, otherwise would be considered complex or even carbohydrates that you'd think like roughage, has a lot of roughage. And as, for example, is full, a lot of people say, I'm eating full grain, not white bread, but these are still exceptionally rich in carbohydrates. So even the complex carbs such as bread, cereal, pasta, potatoes, corn, rice, and the general category of grain and wheat products. And then shifting down towards a very moderate intake is fruits. And we should be very conservative in our intake when we are, of course, when we're diabetic. But we want to limit our fructose intake to below 25 grams per day, including 15 grams from whole fruit. So that's really important. And then moving on to actually with the focus of the diet, low on to this middle tier is about protein intake. We talk about this middle protein diet. Some people only hear about this, for example, LCHF, the low carbohydrate, healthy fat. But in the middle, we should say medium protein. And this is where this jumps in. So we say we want to have a medium amount of grass-fed organic meat and poultry, organic free-range chicken and eggs, and safe and sustainably caught fish, especially salmon. So you're very fortunate there in Canada. And
Yes.
and also raw organic dairy, preferably from animals that are not being given routine antibiotics. And the benefits of consuming some animal protein is in terms of the variety of vitamins and minerals you're getting, especially mineral profile. But I fully respect people that are vegetarian, and you can go very far that direction. Unless, of course, you're struggling with a health condition, then you should be considering taking a more comprehensive approach. And of course, your hand will be taken by a naturopath like myself or Dr. Luhar to guide you on that journey. But then the basis of this food pyramid is the healthy fats and vegetables, the majority of the diet. A plant-based diet, but with an emphasis on healthy fats. So healthy fats include coconuts, avocados, olive oil, butter, and raw nuts. Of course, there's a lot more. I've just summarized some of them, as well as raw organic vegetables. And what a better way than to make your own organic vegetable in your garden and have all these health benefits we've been discussing. And then what I've added onto this myself is a sort of foundation, and that is having enough water. But it's not about so much how much water you drink, but how mineral rich that water is, because many people drink too much water and they're actually demineralizing their bodies, because your body can recycle the same water if you have enough minerals or salts in your diet. So that's why you can see this very conservative figure of 3 to 4 glasses. That's actually the reason. Some people might need more, but if the water is mineral rich, like our ancestors survived under very harsh circumstances, we can do much the same so long as the minerals are there. And then also, because of the lack of nutrients, generally speaking, in our diets, it has become essential to use supplements. And one of the things that I recommend to people is to move away completely from the supplements that are synthetically made, because the whole supplement industry kind of exploded in a similar way that the food industry has. And they're producing a lot of very subpar and unhealthy products that are made in laboratory. Synthetic forms of vitamin A, D, E, and K. These are all the fat-soluble vitamins some people will recognize quite quickly. These are very toxic because your body can't excrete them as efficiently. You absorb these fat-soluble synthetic vitamins and they become toxic. So this is one of the reasons, and many more, I recommend people look at food-based supplements, especially like superfoods from greens. There's so many: moringa, barley, alfalfa, and also herbs and spices. This is where herbal medicine really comes in. Much more than just a supplement, it's really herbal medicine then. But this is this is one of the areas I really want to touch into people. Just to give them one more slide, actually here. This is one if people were especially listening to the last episode, they will realize this is really a kind of like chart to health. And I won't go into all these topics as much, but I will be able to make this available later, that when you're looking at making healthy food choices, you have to be careful of supermarkets, inflammatory foods, and especially fast food. So I think the cook, in the end of the day, is the person that's really governing the health direction of the entire family, and each individual needs to take ownership of that. And support your local organic fruit and veg and meat producers. Focus on the superfoods that I've mentioned already, and have this healthy focus on a lot of healthy fats for the heart and the mind, because then this kind of pulls in a lot of this balance that we want in our blood sugar levels, making sure the body learns to burn fat for fuel and not sugar. So thank you for reminding me, Dr. Luhar, and then luckily everyone had the full amounts. And that's been a long discussion for today. I think we should round up. Thank you so much for your time and energy. And thank you so much, Dr. Luhar. It's been a brilliant and wonderful journey alongside with you. It's been a real honor, and we hope we can do this again.
Likewise, I'm also very privileged, and I want to thank everyone again for joining us today. Certainly, if you have questions, we haven't been able to answer them, but you can reach out to us individually, and I'm sure we'll be doing one of these in the future sometime again. So it's been fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye.